Anything, Paul? Can you hear me?
Lost picture.
Yeah.
All right, can you hear our audio yet?
I just got a text. Karen or Sheila can't find the stream. No, Karen and Sheila can't find the stream for the meeting.
Isn't that posted on the website?
They know that.
Oh, okay.
They can't get it.
Are we supposed to bring up nominations
No,
today?
Is that next month?
I think you're supposed to post the nomination, make the whole cover wear the
Today.
Right.
Yes,
nomination. Vote on them next.
that's right.
Becky, you will be writing on the whiteboard. Or
Yeah. Well, I'll be running for president. Dan, are you Dan back there? Dan, you'll be running for secretary?
Yes, we are now. We weren't originally. We were just seeing.
What was your call sign?
KD9 IPK.
Of the,
Okay.
so we're okay with that. Yeah. Nope, sounds good. We'll do our best. Yep, thanks, Colin. Yep, right.
And Robert's not here, right? K0RMS? Robert K0RMS not here. You're gonna get in contact with him, Lauren?
That's not here still.
Okay, let me know what you find out as soon as you can. Thank you. What do you want?
The remote to the television, just so I can make sure that it's not something simple and it's not muted up.
Oh, okay. All right. We got a picture.
Anyone see a remote control tool? Checking.
Remote control. He's already looked in here, I believe.
No, we can't look for the remote right now. To be able to- Sorry.
Paul, can you hear me?
Yeah.
There we go.
Wait, we got some, hold on, we found the remote.
Can you hear us now?
The magic man.
Oh, we need the picture.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
We had the picture, no audio, now we got audio. The Wizard of Oz.
Is this on the
All right.
DEQ website?
Hey, we've got something there.
Yep.
We also, I've got some slide deck to go with here, but it looks like screen sharing has been turned off. Is there a way to enable that?
Okay. Right,
Yes, no?
If you go to screen share and more options,
sorry, what was that?
Screen sharing is disabled. We've got a slide deck to share as we talk through the presentation tonight. Is there a way that we can get that enabled?
Okay, yeah, just a second. Okay, Joe, we're going to get screen sharing enabled so that we can share screen a deck.
Does somebody need to recognize them and hand over so they can watch?
I think there are microphones in the front of the room.
Multiple participants.
Yeah, the only thing that I'm seeing when I attempt to share is that host disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, Paul, is we able to share now?
Let me try it again. Ah, there we go. We're good.
Okay.
Now you gotta go view the screen. Go up here, you know, other people that are.
They're there.
I got knock some screens around. Yeah, I think I got it here. Thanks. Yep, bye. Just a second here to get this presentation on the main screen of the room.
It says we're offline.
I got his deck over on the screen here. I just need to get it up there.
Yeah, okay. Drag it over there. Well, that's what the gals and over set. Oh, the gals in Hanover were trying to log in on.
Are they trying to get in on the website? Ed, are they trying to get in through the website?
Yes, and they went to they said under live meeting, it says you're offline.
Yeah, don't you love it? They get lost.
Well, I can go back to the light.
All right, so are we ready to go then?
Yes, we're still working through some technical difficulties in getting remote people to see you, but yeah, we.
Okay. Just let us know when you're ready to go.
Go ahead.
I think we should go.
Yeah, let's go ahead, please. Thank you.
He's been patient on.
Paul, you want to feel free to carry on?
Yeah, if you want us to go ahead and get started, we can certainly do that. Or if you
Yeah.
want to wait till you solve the technical challenges, then that's great as well.
What do you think, Jim?
You can go ahead.
You have a login for Twitch?
I
That's what you said.
Paul, it sounds like we're ready to have you move forward here.
All right, very good.
All right.
Well, we'll get started here, and just to kick things off real quick, I want to acknowledge there's actually two of us here, myself, W0YR, and Clint Miller, K0GR. We're both here from the Ames area. Clint is the emergency coordinator for Story County, and he's going to take the first portion of the presentation, then we'll hand off partway through and be ready to go. So we'll go ahead and get started, and Clint will kick us off here.
All right. Well, thanks for inviting us. We talked a lot about this with Colin years back, I think, and just never made it happen until now. So it took a while to get going. We've got a lot of slides. We'll try to move pretty quick. A lot of our photos. So I'm trying to control Paul's screen from afar, and it's working. Okay. So portions of this presentation we've got from Paul English. He's the chief of the U.S. Army Mars, and he came over for several of the COMEXs to Iowa and helped out along with Mark Jensen from Netcom. And so those guys were pretty helpful from the military side. They're kind of the military liaison to the amateur radio groups. And so there'll be some slides from 2017 that we'll show here at the end. Okay, so Iowa National Guard has communication exercises. They call them COMEXs. And the National Guard 671st Troop Command is typically the group that has been hosting those. And Colonel Robert Hedgebeth, KE0GSN. Colonel's now retired, but for most of the COMEXs, he was the driving force behind them, doing a lot of planning along with his staff. And so a lot of this falls back to him for credit for getting these going. The ISIX board was also pretty influential in coming together with these and bringing other players in. And so it was just a great time to meet other responders so that it's not a rainy day, a dark of night, and you're trying to meet new people and figure out how to work with them. And it also was a great way for us to test capabilities. A lot of people had radios and they really had never tried talking to anybody else. And so it was really kind of interesting. Very much at the beginning, it was first we need to crawl, then we're going to walk, and eventually we started to run with these. The first couple of years were pretty brutal in getting things to work. So the very first COMEX actually was just the National Guard only in 2014, and then in the spring, and then in the fall, they decided to add civilians. Now we weren't involved in that at the time, but we heard about it after the fall one, when we got invited to come and participate the next year. And so we found this picture of the first one, I think. And I think they decided that March was not the time of year to be having an exercise. And so the third one was in 2015 at Camp Dodge in Johnston, Iowa. And there were federal, state, and local agencies there. And for the amateur radio side, Story County Aries was present and participating. And they also held a COML trainee class. And it wasn't a actual COML class as much as it was a class for COML trainees to get your task book signed off. And so several of us took advantage of that. Some objectives were just to become familiar with everybody else's capabilities. And we wanted to test interoperability on the NIFOG, the National Incident Field Operations Guide, and National Interoperability Field Operations Guide. If you don't have one of those, go download one. It's a pretty handy book. It lists what everybody else is going to do, and there's some amateur radio pages in there too, so they didn't forget us in that. They wanted to share a common operating picture and real-time video data feeds. And by real-time video, they mean on a helicopter, a Lakota flying around broadcasting video. And then they wanted to do the COML and COMKEY task book sign off. And so this was kind of the day that we had out there. And so we kind of spread out in one big field, and everybody had room to set up their equipment and look at each other's stuff. The postal inspectors were there, a lot of National Guard units. We've had units from Nebraska come, search and rescue out of Nebraska, Lincoln, Nebraska came. The postal inspectors, they repurposed this portable post office as a command vehicle, and it worked pretty well for them. And the Air National Guard has what they call a MEOC, a Mobile Emergency Operations Center. And these are pretty deluxe if you've not seen this before. I believe every state has one of these. And they always bring this thing out, and it's got all the bells and whistles and the accommodations. Here's the front looking towards the hitch. And you see that the sliders come out, and so there's plenty of room to sit in the chairs and operate your position. Pretty nice accommodations. And then this is the opposite end, where there's a little bit of a workroom. You can sit, 6 people around this table. In between, there's a little bitty bathroom and a storage closet, equipment closet between these two areas. Unfortunately, this was our setup. We were under a pop-up tent, and we had the tailgate of our county emergency manager's truck out there, and that's how we operated. And so what may look meager, we ended up having to allow some of the other federal agencies to use our equipment. Paul happened to have a radio that was unlocked, and they were getting on HF frequencies we could never touch and making calls because the equipment other people had brought wasn't working right. And so you can see we just put up a mast and had a 40 and 80 meter inverted V antenna set up. And then we had somewhere in there, the vehicle's parked on a mount, and we had a pole in the air. The red trailer in the background is Polk County Aries trailer. It didn't get used a whole lot, but it was brought out. Tom Rice was there getting his task book signed off, and he went ahead and brought the trailer out. And so the first one was very much can you hear me? Hello? Okay, next station. Oh, okay, I can hear you. Can anybody hear me? And it was very, very basic of just how do I even turn to that channel, and a lot of technical people run around helping people push buttons on radios and wiggle cables and that sort of thing. So we tried it again in 2015, again Camp Dodge, and we had the federal, state, local agencies, and then we added Polk County Aries. they had a contingency out there. So we had a couple of amateur radio groups running around that time. And so again, we wanted to gain practice for everybody using their equipment to operate on those NIFOG frequencies, to gain opportunities for agencies to install, operate, and maintain cross-banding solutions and mobile repeaters. And so some of the mobile repeaters were in vehicles, and one of them or two of them were on a helicopter. We learned pretty quickly that you could only run one mobile repeater on a helicopter at a time. If you turn on two on the same frequencies, it just ruins the channel. And they were ping-ponging back and forth for quite a while with a nice range when two helicopters are in the air. So that was a lesson learned. And so that's where the aerial repeaters come in. We used some HF stuff again. They did a little bit of mobile data, but it was pretty basic stuff. It was mostly military mobile data at that point. So every time you go in, you do a little incident briefing. And so Colonel Hedgepeth is there on our left with the white paper speaking to the group, kind of give everybody their marching orders, assigning them to their groups, sending them off in the morning. Then we tried it again in 2016, and we added Warren County areas this time. And so they ended up separating us into incident command posts and mixed teams. And so the idea being that they didn't want us to stick our head out of a tent and say, hey, did you hear that? And be able to shout at each other. They wanted to do a little more separation to make it more realistic. And they brought in COML trainees to help get some task book sign-off stuff done for those COML positions. And we figured, well, while we were already there, we left somebody in Nevada at our county incident, our EOC, and we were doing some simplex tests and some repeater tests. And we ended up passing some data through FLDigi and narrowband EMS. We passed a situation report for our county set up with equipment there. So that was kind of a side exercise we ran on top of the regular exercise, kind of filled in the downtime. And so this year we happen to have Polk County, I think at this point had 2 trailers. So this is me sitting in the smaller Polk County Aries trailer running one of our radios. Our county had got a grant, and we got these 2 cache radio boxes that have dual band radios in them and a VHF business commercial radio, and then the antennas and such that go with them. And then there's a hot wash. They typically like to do a hot wash afterwards, and they record everything and talk about what worked and what didn't. It was either this year or the year after that somebody said, we should try to do some digital stuff. And I raised my hand and said, we were ready. Nobody else acted like they could receive it. We were ready to send it. So they said, we should do that again. We should try that. So that was kind of a push that we need to be able to move some data, instead of just doing voice all the time. So in 2017, they decided we're going to do some data a little bit. I don't think we did much. But we were separated even more. We were a few miles apart, spread out on Camp Dodge's facility then, and it was 2 full days with some training on the first day and then set up. And so we were out on the training range, out where there's buildings that are they use for paintball exercises and that sort of thing were around. And so we thought, well, let's try 60 meters. That was something that we ought to be able to interop with, and so the National Guard units in Iowa and Missouri, and Mars units around Iowa and the surrounding states got active on 60 meters. And so we actually talked to some military units voice on 60 meters. And so if you're not familiar with 60 meters, the interop channels, the government stations use their government issued call sign, and amateurs use their FCC call sign. Amateur stations are authorized to 100 watts. So we can't use the amplifiers, but government stations can use 3 kilowatts. So they'll blast through. And if you're ever interoperating with somebody from the military, they have some pretty crazy call signs. Civil Air Patrol was involved, and unfortunately, all the call signs in Iowa are tornado. So they all start with tornado, and so you keep hearing tornado on the radio, and everybody's eyes perk up. And that's their call signs. It's all start with tornado. That was kind of interesting. So Operation Stable Mercury 2017, there was some newsletters and such that were happening. So Tom Rice wrote something, submitted it to the Midwest Division newsletter. So you can go find that if you can find the October 2017 newsletter from the Midwest Division. Paul Cowley, who you're going to hear from a little bit, even though it's not Mercury, right? It was Stable Mercury, but they quoted us as Mercury Rising on the podcast. And so you can go listen to Paul talk about that and some of the things that we did. And then we had some HF training from Northcom and US Army Mars. And so that's what Paul's going to get into is kind of a repeat of that training and give you a little more of a introduction to some of the cool stuff that they showed us. And then I remember sitting in 2017 thinking,
Thanks.
wow, this is really good stuff. And then they did it again in 2018, so we got a repeat, so it even more stuck in our brains. So that was really nice. So again, we were out in the field, so we were, brought a pop-up, set up some portable antennas, ground planes for VHF, UHF. We safety first. They were very big on safety, so we had to caution tape off all of our antennas for all the ground wires. They didn't want anybody tripping over anything. So we had to partition that off. Here's Ben W0BGM on the radio, probably 60 meters, I think. We did a little bit of 40 and 80 that year, but most of it was on 60. We were able to talk to the Missouri National Guard. I don't know that many other stations were actually got out off of Camp Dodge on HF. Everybody was making ground wave work, but they really weren't talking outside of the camp. And so we were talking to a unit in Missouri. Here was the antenna we're using. If you see the pole at the far end, that's basically a 12-foot high, 60-meter dipole. And that's kind of our bread and butter 60-meter antenna. Usually we're not trying to talk to California. So NVIS is usually the mode we're looking for. And so you can see we got a lot of flagging tape out and put surrounding that. And then again, there's the 40-80 meter inverted V, and we elevated it the top of the mast a little higher, and we had that VHF UHF antenna, and no rotator. We use the Armstrong method, we call it. There's a rope tied to the front, and and you can run around in a circle pulling the thing and steer it, and then you stake it the direction you want to point. Works great if there's no wind. This was the command post that the National Guard set up. Basically, these three vehicles park exactly in the right spot, and then the doors can connect open. And so you could walk from the first vehicle to the third vehicle through the little breezeways. And so it made a very nice command post for them to do their operations, kind of manage the incident. You can kind of see the HF antenna they were trying to run, and it wasn't really functional for them. They really couldn't get very far, but they might have been able to talk to California, but nobody was listening for them. So that was kind of an interesting went over and help troubleshoot. Some of the Army Mars guys went over and helped them try to figure out what they were doing. So we were mixed teams. So it was a random assortment. They kind of mixed us all up. And so you've got a lot of different uniforms here of the teams that were assigned out there. And the amateurs were mixed in with public safety and military units. So 2018 was the one you guys probably have heard of, because it was the one that we got outside of outside of Camp Dodge and spread out across Iowa a little more. And so that was in April of 2018. They even made up their own little insignia for that. That's the god of Mercury. And so he's stable. You don't want your temperature fluctuations is kind of the thought. And so this happened to be pretty close to the 20th anniversary of a derecho. And so at the time, everybody was like, a derecho, what? Wasn't quite as familiar as the last few years. And so we were using that as our exercise, was built around that. The first few years was very much, can you hear me now? Okay, great, next station. And the last few years became, here's some actual messages. We're going to pass real messages, real traffic, get a response, send it back, confirm that it's working. We did some phone patching to the federal government, where we were actually sending messages to people, and then they would confirm it and tell us that that they received it, and then one of the guys running around, Paul English, would get a phone call confirming that the message was received. Okay, so they had a website going with the weather radar feed from the 98 storm. So you had the storm spotters involved, amateur radio, military, the Mars guys, first responders from public safety, emergency management has been involved a lot of years, and then we had soldiers and airmen. And so part of the exercise, we used DMR and Skywarn to communicate with the National Weather Service. They were active. And you know, Ares and Mars supported incident commanders in Cedar Rapids, Iowa City, Des Moines, and we used HF, VHF, and UHF for that. And then we had a statewide HF net on 60 meters, and we did voice and data over 60 meters. And so this was where Paul was set up. He was in this is Polk County's larger trailer, and this was down at the Des Moines International Airport. They sent them, so they were across Polk County there. And so they were operating out of their new trailer here. And then kind of in the middle of the screen is one of our Go boxes that the county bought for Story County. That's what one of those looks like. There's the outside of their big trailer. And this is Mark Jensen from Northcom. Used the HF radio to pass a message on a 213 message form. And there was a couple other groups there. I can't remember who the mobile EOC was. Paul probably can point that one out. I can't remember who those guys were. And then the Air Force had their fire and emergency services vehicle out and showing it off. Okay, so now we got some videos. Basically, back then I had the wherewithal to record some of this. I thought, we've done this how many times that it would be better if we actually had video. So now we've got a video to play for you of a recording I did.
This is K0GR coming from Operation Stable Mercury 2018. I am at Camp Dodge, Iowa, and you are looking at one of the assets for ICP 5, Incident Command Post 5. This is the Iowa Statewide Interoperable Communication Systems Board trailer, and I am the COML assigned to deploy this asset for the state. We set up on the 23rd of April 2018 and deployed the outriggers, stood up the tower. We did extend the tower and then brought it back down because we didn't want to have to set the guys. And so we are participating in a communications exercise with the Iowa National Guard, an interoperable communications exercise. And this year we are deploying a lot more 60-meter HF activity. And so I thought I would show a little video about some of our operations. So this is mainly amateurs using the ICS trailer. One of our members is also with the Civil Air Patrol, and so he brought his Civil Air Patrol vehicle out with his whip and is not in NVIS mode, and so he's not hearing many of the other stations. Moving to my left, you'll see that we have our 60-meter dipole low to the ground, about 12 feet off the ground at the ends, and that will work well for us as an NVIS antenna. We've had good luck with that. We also deployed a 60-meter loop antenna that I recently built, so this is its maiden journey. Doing quite well. The receiver is a little quieter on this antenna as expected. It is more wire because it's a full wave loop versus a half wave, and so that has been a nice addition. If we look across the field, there's some assets from the VA, the Veterans Affairs Administration, and I'm not very good with the camera. Then we have the Coast Guard Auxiliary running several different frequencies over there. Our exercise controllers are sitting at the table talking to one of the Coast Guard Auxiliary. I don't see our exercise incident commander just now. We are deployed with some National Guard assets, and they are doing their stuff. We are interoperable with the National Guard on 60 meters, and we've talked to a few of them. we got some additional software called MSDTM. It's usually used by Mars. And because there is no data baud limit on 60 meters, we can run 1200 baud. Mike 110 is the mode that they use, and so we were able to use that on 60 meters and exchange traffic with the National Guard units. The last antenna I have to show you here is in the trailer. There was this telescoping mast type of thing with a G5RV antenna on it, and it has actually performed pretty poorly on 60 meters in this configuration, and so we're going to recommend that they purchase something different for the trailer asset. And I've completed the loop, and so now I'll take you inside and show you some operations inside this trailer. I brought a tripod and put a ground plane antenna up so we could work 2 meter and 440 repeaters. Military assets are rolling through. Go inside the trailer here. NOAA is inside operating, KE0AIH. And he's around the corner here, and we'll show you that in a second. So this is the trailer radios that they provided for amateurs. It's an ICOM it is an ICOM D-Star radio and a Kenwood all-mode, all-band radio. And that lives in the trailer here, along with that G5RV. There's a laptop that belongs to the trailer, and it connects to this rack here.
Switching to channel 2.
There is a UPS on the bottom, 2 repeaters. One is on 800 megahertz, one is on 400 megahertz, public safety, an ACU 5000 gateway, and a Harris quad band radio. And those are all able to connect together, plus additional handhelds to serve as cross-band repeat if needed, or just gateway functions with different talk groups. There's Noah. He is working 60 meters for the exercise. We have a laptop. If we need to run digital, we can run FLDigi and do NBEMS and pass 213s that way. Currently, we're running the Mike 110 through MSDTM. It's a Mars type software that they gave us, and so we are running
ICP1
traffic through there. We do have a printer set up. Oh, there's some of that Mike 110 coming through. Noah's only 17, and he's been doing pretty well today, operating the radio. Also in the trailer, there is a cache of handhelds for when those need to be reassigned on an incident. And then there's a generator control panel for all the power distribution in the trailer. Let's see if we can film Noah receiving a message here.
ICP-5, ICP-1, K0PS, incoming.
All right, let's into that video. So one of the things that we got to point out is that we talked about this Mike 110, and through the procedure of setting all this up, we figured out that there is no baud limit on 60 meters. And so we were running full high-speed HF data, and we were actually, they told us later that we were the first amateurs to ever pass high-speed data with the military. We were exchanging messages. So that was kind of our feather in our hat that we were able to do that. So that was pretty neat. And go ahead and click the next slide, Paul.
All right, you're up.
Okay, now I got control. Okay. There you go.
Yes, no?
It doesn't want to advance.
We'll try that.
Okay, so you know, this was something they included. You know, it's very important to log your activities. You know, significant events, shift changes, briefings, maintenance issues. You know, helps you relay things to the next shift when they come on, so they're not totally clueless about what's going on. What are you waiting for? What's outstanding? You know, what are they expecting out of you? You know, we need to track what personnel are on duty in case there's a question that comes up later. And that will become the official record of support provided during an incident. So they want to know number of people providing support, and then those people turn their hours in, and those hours become dollars for an incident. So it's very important that we basically turn in timesheets, because that's the match that FEMA requires for these local incidents when they get all these disaster dollars. So if your support is not logged, it didn't happen. And is it going to go?
Just try mouse click.
Yeah, just bump it once. I think I'm done. Okay, just remember to speak slowly. And so I find it's helpful to actually rewrite what I'm saying. And so I can't talk any faster than I can write, and that slows me down. Speak clearly. Spell out difficult words phonetically. Break up the message to allow the receiver to ask for clarification if it's long. Remember, speak slowly and speak slowly. And now I'm going to hand it over. Oh, I got this last one here. So just what we're trying to show here was that basically amateur radio sits down at the bottom, Aries, Races, that's Saturn, and that all plugs into the Mars regional nets. There's a whole other world going on HF with the military, but our gateway into that is through the Mars stations. So just kind of wanted to share that piece.
All right, I'll press on here. As Clint mentioned, there's a lot going on 60 meters or 5 megahertz, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why that is. I'm not going to get too deep here, but we do have 5 interoperability channels. These are the only frequencies in the entire spectrum that we share together between amateurs, DHS, FEMA, Coast Guard, Mars, and other organizations. So if we're going to interoperate, it's on 60 meters where it's going to happen. So let's talk about that a little bit. We're all pretty familiar with bands and what frequencies work well for us. In general, long distances at or higher frequencies during the day, lower frequencies at night. But Clint touched on something called NVIS, or Near Vertical Incident Skywave. A few more slides down, I'll get into a little bit more detail about what that is. So we're familiar with that upper piece. We're actually going to use lower frequencies and drop that down into the 2 to 8 megahertz range, rather than up into the 4 to 30 megahertz that we're typically familiar with for our DX HF stuff. 2 to 3 meg at night, 4 or 5 during the morning and evening, 5, 6, 7 during the day. So you can see that 5 megahertz frequency range is really well positioned to give us an idea of where we can interoperate almost around the clock. There are a lot of sources to find out what's going on in the ionosphere, and that's really important for us to select a frequency that's going to work for us overall. And as Clint mentioned, this was something that was actually touched on twice. They brought in special HF subject matter experts to teach both the military guys, but also the amateurs and the other auxiliary organizations that were there about HF propagation and where to find the resources that are needed to really make that effective for us. I won't click on all these links, but there's a number of great links here. I will touch on some of those resources and show you what's available from there. Particularly helpful are the ionograms that are available from the University of Massachusetts Lowell through their Global Ionospheric Radio Observatory. You'll notice that we've got time standard stations scattered throughout the entire HF frequency, from 2.5 all the way up to 20 megahertz between WWV and the Canadian CHU station. These are going to become markers for us. We can gain a lot of information, even if the internet's down, just simply by listening to these time markers. We can identify WWV by a male voice announcement, WWVH out of Hawaii by a female voice announcement, and a different format out of CHU at 3.33, 785, and 14.67 meg. These transmit 24/7, and we can really use these to know what's going on with propagation in various locations. These are really frequencies that you should have programmed into your HF radio, so you can turn it on and dial up and be ready to listen. So general rules of thumb here, if we're getting our strongest signals up towards the high-end frequencies, 15 or 20 meg, we want to target a 6 or 7 megahertz frequency for this NVIS. Next slide, we'll talk about that a little bit more and get into the theory behind it. You can see here that if our strongest signals are down at 2.5 to 5 megahertz, then we'll want to look at the 2 or 3 megahertz frequency for NVIS. So this really gives us kind of a judge, some signposts along the road based on where we're hearing the time signals and what frequency we want to use for this NVIS. So what is NVIS? Some of you may have already heard of it. It's not an antenna type, regardless of what some folks say or teach. It really is a propagation mode or propagation path. And as the next slide will illustrate a little bit more clearly, it fills in the distance between the ground wave that we can hear just local and that first hop with our low angle DX that we're used to. So typically we're in the range of 50 and 600 miles. It's generally free from fading. It's pretty solid. You're going to want a very low antenna, 8th wavelength or less, and lower antennas obviously give us better noise figures, and we don't need high power here either. We can use a large range of frequencies, really anything between the lowest usable frequency, or LUF, and the critical frequency for the F2 layer. I'll show you how you can determine that on a daily basis. But these are frequencies in the range of 40 to 80 meters, depending on the time of the day. Here's that illustration where you've got our traditional DX. We want to get, off the continent or at least out to the coast. We've got this skip zone where we're actually not hearing anybody and they're not hearing us. Either it's going through the ionosphere or we're angling out to that first hop. And we might have multiple hops even beyond that. With NVIS, we're bringing the antenna closer to the ground. And what that does is that forces the antenna pattern largely vertical. And you can kind of think of it almost like you're sticking a hose up in the air or putting your thumb over it and pointing it straight up, where it creates really an umbrella of signal that's in a solid coverage area at the expense of those long haul communications. If you're interested, this presentation is available on my website, and feel free to explore some of these links that are helpful in learning a little bit more about NVIS. So let's talk a little bit about how we know what frequencies to use. And I mentioned the University of Massachusetts Lowell, or UML. They're a site that aggregates these ionograms from different stations really throughout the world. But the ones that we're really particularly interested in are here stateside. These are ways that we can measure the ionosphere. And you may have listened on HF and you hear a little zoop up the frequency. That's an ionosonde. That's going out, it's quickly scanning through and measuring the return signal back. we'll talk about these cool pictures and what they mean here on the next few slides. These are really measuring the ionosphere, and the different colors and the numbers here along the sides allow us to know what's going on in the ionosphere rather than just flipping on the rig and saying, oh, not hearing anything today, or, oh, hey, bands are really coming in great, especially when we want to operate in this near vertical incident skywave mode. So we see down here at the bottom left of this graph, these reflections are the E layer. And what this is showing us is how high in kilometers and at what frequency across the bottom axis here, at what frequency that layer reflected back to Earth. So below about 2 megahertz, and we can actually come up over here on the left here, we're actually at 2.1 megahertz. That's our D layer. That's our absorption. Nothing is getting through at all less than 2.1 megahertz. Ionosphere is absorbing 100% of the RF there. The E layer, we're starting to get some reflections back. And then we see, in this case, the F1 layer. This asymptotic curve right here tells us that we're in the F1. And then we see a second one as we approach the F2. And then this tells us the height of that signal refraction. The green, we can really kind of ignore that. That's a quirk related to the Earth's magnetism, and the magnetic field causes electromagnetic waves to take different paths through the ionosphere. And so we see different reflections as a consequence of that. But what it tells us is the FOF2, or the critical frequency, and it also tells us the Fmin, or lowest usable frequency. So between these two, on this given day, 2.1 megahertz to 6.15 megahertz is the range at which NVIS propagation is possible. Now, down in the lower left, there's a fancy chart here that really makes the work pretty easy for us. And what we want to do is look out here and say, okay, I really want to operate in this mode, and I want to reach out 100, 200, 400 kilometers. Iowa's what? 500 by 300 kilometers, give or take. So we're going to be in the lower end of this, depending on where we're at. You guys up in Dubuque, you know, if you're hauling down to Des Moines, you're going to be, 250. And this will tell us what the maximum usable frequency is for NVIS propagation. So that was off the Austin site. I typically like to use, if I'm looking at ionograms, the three kind of central US sites are Alpena, Michigan, Boulder, Colorado, and Austin, Texas. And between the three, you can kind of get an idea of what the ionosphere is doing here in the middle US and where we're going. So this is a sample of the Boulder station from September of 2017. These are actual downloads that I pulled, and there's a history that you can go back and look at. This is the same station, about the same time of day. So if we look up here at the top, we can see that we're about 1700, and they're about 2 months apart. So what are the differences in propagation? Well, we can see here that the D layer actually had quite a bit. We couldn't do anything below 2.7. On this particular day, we could go down as low as 1.8. We could go as high as 6.8, almost 6.9 megahertz. And we're seeing a lot more activity here with stronger returns out of the F layer. We're also seeing something interesting here, and you'll see this quite regularly. I've got a couple slides from now that you'll also pick it up. What we're actually seeing here is a reflection. So the radio waves are bouncing off the ionosphere, back to Earth, bouncing off Earth, bouncing back up to the ionosphere, and being received a second time. And that's what we're seeing here with this second set of reflections here that's roughly double the height of the first. But it's not an exact mirror like we'll see here in a few slides. We're actually seeing it spread out. So what that's indicative of is a little bit thicker F2 layer that's causing a little more skew in our signal there. Basically, better propagation is what it's going to result in for us. Here's an example. These are as of yesterday at 0100 Zulu. Actually, I guess, yeah, technically yesterday, about this time yesterday. We can see here, there's this is our D layer. We really have only got kind of an E into an F sort of merged together, and really not much happening at all. Pretty indicative of poor propagation, which is what we're seeing. Again, the green is the extraordinary reflection, and the pink is the one that we're really concerned about, which is the ordinary wave, the electric component there. So in this case, if we wanted to do NVIS within the state, we're really in that 250 kilometer range. We're going to be right in that 5 megahertz sweet spot. Here's Austin last night as well. This is a clear indication here where I'd mentioned the full reflection. We've actually got 3 bounces here. So it bounced off once, reflected off the earth, bounced off a second time, reflected off the earth, and bounced off a third time. And each of these is a pretty clear mirror image telling us that that F layer is very thin and very, very sharp. So again, not a lot happening there. Our maximum frequency here, critical frequency, FOF2, is at 5.1 meg. Here's Alpena, Michigan, very weak responses. And you can see actually the critical frequencies dropped all the way to 2.75 megahertz, our minimum at 2. So real narrow band there. NVIS is not going to be possible on an amateur allocation on a day like this. You can also use tools. This is one from the Australian government that's compiled from all of these ionosons globally. It updates at 40 minutes past the hour, and then you pull it at whatever time you're there. And really for the NVIS communication, anything within 300 kilometers, whatever color is at your location is going to be about the optimum frequency for F2 layer NVIS propagation. So you remember from the previous slide here a couple back, we looked at this and we said, okay, we're really going to be in this 5 megahertz, 4 point something to 5.1 sweet spot. And if we look at Iowa right here, we're in that 4, not quite 5 sweet spot right there. This is global, updates real time once every hour. Some links as well that you can follow. Won't click through on those for tonight's presentation. VOACAP from the Voice of America originally is a tool that can be used both online and in an offline program to help predict based on solar flux. You input your smooth sunspot number, antennas at both ends, and your locations. And based on the time of year and the smooth sunspot number, it will give you a prediction based on time across the bottom axis and frequency on the vertical axis here to help you get a sense of what your path reliability is at any given time. This very much follows a typical curve that we're used to seeing, where higher frequencies give us longer distances during the daytime and reduced at night. You can also do an area prediction. So you punch in a location and it'll give you a prediction based on a certain time of day. So what did we learn in all of this? Well, as Clint noted, HF can fill a niche role. It's largely statewide or regional in our communications. It's not really well suited to local communications. That role really is better left to VHF or UHF resources, but it can help us get statewide or regional in instances where our other networks or other paths are down. We also learned that 60 meters is really a unique resource and one that we need to practice with. Some radios need to be unlocked. Some radios need to be programmed or modified in advance. And it's critical that we do that in advance and practice with those bands and those frequencies and understand how they work in advance. Something that's unique on 60 meters that we're not really familiar with as amateurs is that these are channelized allocations. We have to be exactly on that frequency in order to be within our allocation on 60 meters. But it's also uniquely suited for NVIS propagation. We are allocated on a secondary nature, so if you hear other stations on there that are non-amateurs, we want to yield to them unless we're communicating with them specifically. But we can operate in some of the digital modes there. Voice traffic on HF requires patience and practice. That's why we join nets and practice handling traffic. And there's a lot to learn about HF propagation. I've barely scratched the surface here with a simple education on reading ionograms. But overall, practice is important, and it's vital for us to exercise as we go. So with that, that's our presentation at this point. I don't know how the room's set up, but we're open to questions here, both Clint and myself.
Can you hear me with this mic?
Not with that microphone, no.
How about this one here?
Yes, that one works.
Hey, I'll run around. You were just keeping it warm. All right. Who's got a question?
I got one that might be pertinent. I just wondered if they were doing any cross frequency between like Mars and amateur, because I operated Navy Mars before that went out of existence, and we were operating at 5.004. And I just wonder if you were listening on one and talking on another.
No, we're actually operating, and that was the unique thing about the 60 meters is both Mars and Federal and amateurs and ... have allocations there. So we don't have to do the cross frequency gyrations as far as you listen here and I'll talk here and you listen there and I'll talk there. We're actually talking on the exact same channel, which really adds a lot of benefit there.
Other questions?
I understand that 60 meters is the only amateur allocation that actually has channels designated 1 to 5, I guess. But what protocol are you using then for digital?
Do you want to take that one, Clint?
Sure. So, I think the last slide Paul had up said something about PSK is sort of preferred on 60. And so if we're doing amateur, that's probably a good one. But there's no standard for our exercise. We decided that channel 2 was the digital channel, channel 1 was voice. And so we would make contact on voice and say, okay, I'm getting ready to send you some digital traffic, switch to channel 2. And then we'd flip over, do a quick voice contact just to confirm that they made the switch. And then it was prepare to copy. And then you'd hit enter about 5 or 10 second delay. And some people needed the delay because they had to switch cabling on the radio. But otherwise, there's a lot of possibilities there. Because, as amateurs, we can pass digital messaging at the high baud rates. We are not limited to the normal 300 baud on 80 and 40. But I haven't heard of a lot, other than our exercise, I haven't heard of anybody getting on there and playing around. And actually, my day jobs, I work for the federal government, so I got good at reading the government language and ended up reading the federal code that said that we could do that. We were planning on getting a exception from FCC. The Northcom and the Mars guys told us we had to do that until we found that regulation, and then they checked into it, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess you're right. So we don't have to get permission on 60.
Thank you.
And as Clint noted, we were actually operating a military standard format without encryption to make us compliant with amateur rules. It's the MIL standard M110 or Mike 110 data. So you kind of heard it. It's just a raw data tone. It sounds unlike most data modes that we've heard, but that was the most recent one. We were actually, at least according to the Mars guys, we were the first amateurs to ever pass M110 data interoperable with a military unit, which is kind of fun.
Anything else? I turn it over to you.
Sir? Oh, can you still hear me?
Yes,
Listen, I want to thank you for your presentation tonight.
no, absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to present.
We also appreciate your assistance there. I don't remember your sidekick's name there.
Oh, I'm Clint, K0GR. If you want to email me, you can just look up the Story County Emergency Coordinator for Aries, and that'll have you can just send an email at k0gr@arrl.net if you want to get in touch with me and have any questions for me.
Well, thank you, Clint. We appreciate both you fellas tonight.
Absolutely.
Any more questions? All righty. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Night.
Oh, is there anything else we should be bringing up here tonight, Ralph? Anything you can think of? Anybody else got anything? Yes. Okay. Well, we don't know yet, but I'm running for president. Sorry, Dan.